You are listening to the Tricorder transmissions.
Weekly Trek, Episode 8, second week of June, 2018. Welcome to Weekly Trek, Episode 8. This week's host is yours truly, Barry DeFord from PoliTreks, and from TrekProfiles, we have John Krikorian. Weekly Trek is a Tricorder transmission podcast network weekly show covering the news and current events in the Star Trek universe with rotating hosts from the Tricorder Transmissions Network. Each week, our hosts hand-select Trek news from around the internet and present them to you with our analysis. Think of it like the 6 o'clock news, but for Star Trek. So, John, how you doing this week?
I'm doing super well, Barry. What a treat and what a delight to be here with you doing Weekly Trek, man.
Yeah, this is our second voyage together on Weekly Trek, as I recall.
Oh, that's right. It's like, reunited. It's awesome.
Yeah, together again, at last. So there is quite a few things happening in the Star Trek universe as we roll towards STLV. We start looking at some possibilities for the next season of Discovery, and a lot of rumors floating around there, which I'm really interested to bite down on pretty hard. So let's start with a fellow Canadian, Mr. Todd McFarland. So he has those Discovery phasers that he bought the license for, the Discovery and Prime Universe world of toys and weapons and all that sort of stuff, and it looks like this one is looking like it's going to get canceled, and they were kind of cryptic about how it was going to get canceled. It looks like the point here sort of stems a lot to this thing looks like a gun, and if cell phones can get people killed in some cases, we don't necessarily want to release it right off the bat because we don't want anyone getting hurt. That's sort of the take I got from it. What about yourself?
Well, I have to tell you, Barry, I actually am a little bit of a nerd here. So when I saw the news article, I actually looked up the CFRs, which is the Code of Federal Regulations. And it actually talks about what the details of this are and sort of what gives some insight into what we think the issue is. And under Title 15, Part 272, talks about how toys, lookalikes, and imitation firearms have to be intentionally disfigured to make it clear that they're a toy. So it requires a blaze orange, which is actually a color, a blaze orange or orange color brighter than specified by the federal standard, permanently affixed to the front as an integral part, and it has to really stick out. So in other words, you're essentially not able to manufacture a replica phaser, is what it comes down to. Because if it's a replica, it has to have the orange on the front. It has to be really big and really prominent, and it won't be a good lookalike. There's only one exception, and that's if it's being manufactured for movie and television production. Those are the only replicas that are allowed to be made under the Code of Federal Regulations. So I think that might be what the issue is. And so there might be some question as to whether or not this is actually whether a toy phaser meets the definition of a firearm. I don't know. I mean, it's a theoretical toy. It's not a replica of a real thing. So I think that might be a gray area, but it seems to me that that's what this is really about. And having dealt with corporate attorneys in my normal day job, I think probably their advice is always to be cautious about this kind of stuff. So I can imagine that that's probably what the delays are. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree that this is probably the likelihood. I mean, I grew up with toy weaponry, and I remember the blaze orange front on all of them. And I'd have some friends who'd get creative with spray paint and stuff like that. And then parents would get angry at them for doing that, because it's true. You know, there are some toys and stuff out there that tend to look very much like the real deal. And given the fact that the Discovery phaser is a lot more like the TOS phasers that did sort of look like guns, I could see this being a thing. I mean, even at STLV, I'm not terribly certain we'd be able to wander around with those sitting sort of as a sidearm or something like that, even if we were cosplaying. So I can see the concern. I mean, for me, it's always fun to see new product coming out and everything. And I do think McFarland's team are very, very creative, but for the sake of safety, making sure that no one ever gets mistaken for any way, shape, or form, I think that's important. One quick fun aside, actually, in my hometown up here in Nowheresville, Northern Canada, we had a fellow who was going to a costume party at a comic book store, and he was dressed like a person from Fallout, and he ended up actually getting stopped by the police, and they had... They were worried that he was actually carrying weaponry, like real actual weaponry, and was about to go do something. And it just turned out that one of the police officers who got there, their kid played Fallout, and they were able to identify the character, what he was playing as, and were able to call off the threat. So it is a real thing, and it is a real thing that happens. And I would hate to see somebody get hurt.
Oh, I totally agree with you. So hopefully they can find some compromise that makes this possible. Because in other words, there has to be a market for quality replica toys. And I just, it puts the kibosh on that whole thing, right? But at the same time, they want to balance safety. So let's hope they can find some way forward and we can all have our grown-up toys. Because let's be clear, this isn't for kids, for sure.
No, absolutely not. Never for kids. This is for, well, sometimes for kids. Kids at heart. That's what I'll put it. Because I dress up all the time and I'm 35 years old. So yeah. So in other news, Tig Notaro has shared a little bit more about her role in the upcoming season of Star Trek Discovery. Of course, she is a famous comedian and has was actually, I think she was talking on a late night show with Mr. Stephen Colbert, and she's told a little bit different about what her name is. Originally, her name was going to be Chief Engineer Denise Reno of the USS Hiawatha, but now it sounds like it might be Jet Reno instead. And I'm wondering, and it's sort of, again, Trekcore is talking about this sounding a lot more like a maybe some kind of nickname like Trip Tucker or Bones or something along those lines. Do you think this is a possibility that her name is Denise, but she's got a nickname of Jet?
I think whichever way it goes is fine, however they want to do it, right? I mean, it's not like this is a pre-established character, so they're in the creative process. However they want to organize that, ain't no big deal to me.
No, I however they want to do it. I do quite like the use of nicknames, though, especially in Star Trek. They always come out kind of nice and kind of add that extra personal appeal to each of the characters. As we know, I'm going to be doing the Couch Trek activity at our Tricorder party at STLV, and actually there is one character who does in fact have a nickname as well, and this was long before the news came in, so I've always sort of been aware of the idea of nicknames and stuff like that, and I've always really appreciated that sort of extra human touch that some shows definitely do, and Star Trek does it well.
One of the things that I noticed in the reporting of it is that she was talking about how, especially because she's an engineering character, she has got all this technobabble, and it is just impenetrable, right? I mean, I'll tell you, that's a knock on Star Trek, I think, that's been around at least, I think, more in the TNG era since, and more recently, where there's just like a whole page of, let's tech the tech and Tetryon particle emissions with the deflector dish and analyze the waveform doodads, and I think she's really struggling with that based on the reporting, but goes with the part for being an engineering character for sure.
Well, I'm a connoisseur of technobabble, to be honest, or Treknobabble. Of course, the Vesta class nacelles are capable of transwarp, but only through a refit, and of course that means that
oh dear,
they yeah. That, of course, the photonic plasma residue produces isn't visible through variable through variable constants. So even I can't even do it. But it rattling off all those fun little bits, I always enjoy quite a bit. So I don't know. I think, when you hear about LeVar Burton talking about it, he would just throw words in and would go for it. And I think that just is a testament to his creativity. So personally, I think being a quick-witted comedian, that might give her maybe a bit of a leg up, or maybe some room to play and kind of arrange some interesting gardens of words, Treknobabble words, and see what she can create from that. So
yeah, I mean,
speaking.
Sorry. I was just going to say that the Treknobabble as such never bothers me, and I think it can also be a little bit fun. The only part of it that always I worry about is when they start to hang too much of the plot off of the Treknobabble, and we can't do this thing. Well, let's just realign the digitized Krikorian particles, and then we can do the thing. Okay, great, and that resolves everything in the last 3 minutes of the episode. And that stuff I'm not too much of a fan of. So as long as it's used properly, I'm on board. And one other thing I just want to say for the folks who are listening to this, if you want to get a little bit of Tig Notaro, I'd highly, highly recommend going and finding the old This American Life podcast episode where she's in it. And it's a really nice intro to her and an overview of her career. And she talks about how she actually got cancer and she put that into her act. And that's what she built her whole act around. Her comedy sketch was all about that. And it's actually really funny and touching at the same time. So check it out.
Yeah, I recall that episode, and there's something about using humor and tragedy she talks about, or in stressful situations and whatnot. And I often think that those hard times are often what make artists even better and stronger. So yeah, definitely, I'm gonna have to cue that one up and listen to it again. So Patrick Stewart had some cryptic things to say. I'm not terribly certain what he could mean by all of this, but he said, and I am going to see if I can quote it here once my computer decides to be a thing again, that he has a big reason to watch Star Trek Discovery coming up. He says, you mean the series and not the movie, because there is a movie due out very, very soon? No, I haven't, but I may have good cause to look at it very soon. Now, everyone is freaking out going, oh my gosh, is Captain Picard going to show up? Of course, we also had Marina Sirtis showing up in Toronto and taking pictures with Mr. Frakes just recently as well. I'm not sure. I wouldn't put too much stake into what Patrick Stewart is saying necessarily. If he shows up, I would actually personally hope that Captain Picard doesn't show up in Star Trek Discovery. And I mean, if he does, we'll see how it goes. But I don't know. I worry that doing that might throw a little more fan service than I would personally like. If they reinvent a new character or make a new character that they have Patrick Stewart play, that might be cool. But I don't know. It's kind of weird to think that, they might try to shoehorn in a character from TNG. I don't see the need myself. John?
I file this whole thing under the too much of a muchness department. The guy said, well, I might have good reason to watch the show. That could mean anything. It could mean that a friend of his has a guest spot. It could mean that he provided a voiceover for something, or it could just mean that he's heard that there's some really good episodes coming up. I mean, there's just not a lot there, I think, for us to really figure out what it means. But we're all going to watch it anyway. So I think it's exciting. I think it's fun. I think it's great that Sir Pat is on board. And let's watch and see if we can figure out what he means. Other than that, I don't think there's anything really to say about it.
No, other than sometimes we internet folk tend to be like a sewing circle and just let things happen. It's okay. We'll see how it all pans out. However, I don't know. I think with the new styling on the Klingon makeup, for some reason I'm just picturing Patrick Stewart set up like that, doing his best best sort of Klingon bombastic sort of style, and that actually might be kind of cool. So I'll just leave it at that.
Sorry, I'm just picturing Sir Pat getting into the Klingon makeup and a thought bubble over his head that said, I was once part of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and now it's come to this.
Yeah, no, definitely. He's got a lot of acting chops behind him, and so yeah, to throw him behind all that makeup might be entertaining. I've never actually seen him with a ton of makeup on, other than say like the Romulan in Reunification and Reunification 2, but
well, they did age him, so that was quite a bit of makeup, although it was still supposed to be him. And by the way, he actually looks better live today than in the aged versions of him from the 80s show.
I agree, and so that's a testament. I don't know. He must eat his Wheaties every day, and that's good. Stay fit, eat well, and be Patrick Stewart, and you'll be fine. So Star Trek novels continue coming out for the Discovery franchise, and the latest one is a deep dive into the life of Saru, our Kelpian bridge officer, and the title is Fear Itself by none other than James Swallow. And I am admittedly moving slower through some of these Star Trek novels than I would like, and I would blame my job as a educator. I don't have a lot of time for free time reading, but I have been enjoying the novels as I've been going. And of course, I'm currently running through Drastic Measures, and Desperate Hours was a joy to read. So when this does come out, I'm hopeful to hear some good conversation over on Reading Trek. Have you been keeping up with these, John?
So thank you for asking, Barry. So I did, in fact, read the first two that came out. I have this one, Fear Itself. I did get it on pre-order from Amazon, but I haven't cracked it open yet. So it's sitting next to my reading chair at the top of the pile. So I got like a magazine or two on top of it. I'm sort of old school with my reading. Magazines, paper books, Dead Tree stuff. Very, very bad. But anyway, I will read it. And it's funny because when I think about the first two books, Barry, I have some regret. Not regret's too strong a word, but I have a different thought about the first two books in that my reading of them significantly affected how I interpreted some of the episodes of Discovery as I was watching them. So the very first book, Desperate Hours, is the one that has a lot of Saru in it. And it gives a lot of insight into his interior monologue in his head as he's going through some various things in the book without any spoilers. And just knowing what was going on in his head and what I read in that book, it very much informed how I interpreted his character as I was watching Discovery episodes as they were being aired. It's impossible for me now, in retrospect, to separate the character on the screen from the character in the book. I just can't do it. And so on my own little podcast, when we were talking about some Discovery episodes, there were people that had reactions to some episodes that I had a very different reaction to. And I think it was because of the information that I got from those books and how that integrated into what I was seeing on the screen. So I think that this one, especially because it's been advertised to us, again, I haven't read it yet, so I can't spoil anything, but it's been advertised to us as a really deep dive into Saru. So if we read it, I think it's going to really impact what we think of Saru going forward. So I'm just putting that out as sort of a gentle, I don't know if spoiler warning is the right word, for people out there that this might also happen to you if you start reading those books. They're really well done. I loved all of them that I've read, but I think it's important to realize that it might color your interpretations of the show for sure.
And I think that has a lot to do with the canon versus head canon versus how we interpret characters even in the books and novelizations of Star Trek as well. John, I agree that I have done my Discovery rewatch now. I binged it a little while ago while I was doing a bunch of marking, and there were actually a lot of different takes that I put on different characters. And thinking about it, you're right. And again, I don't want to put out any spoilers or anything like that, but I find Saru extremely fascinating. And when I first saw him in the TV show, I really found him fascinating. So I hadn't read the books yet. So yeah, I wonder if sometimes we overload on some of this. So depending on how fast or how slow you read, that could definitely affect the way you take in the next season of Discovery or the previous season on a rewatch. So that's an interesting take. One thing I would want to say about liking the idea of a Saru based novel is, the title really draws me in, the idea of Fear Itself. And of course he is a prey species, and he does show a lot of worry and such. So I do kind of like that idea of him working through that. Now I would assume, and I haven't read the back of the novel yet, but I'm assuming it's a prequel.
I don't know. Oh, well, actually, I believe it is, because as I was flipping through the book, again, without any spoilers, but it did seem to have a lot of Giorgio in it. So I don't know if that's flashback or if it's in the current time frame of the book, but some of it certainly seems to be prequel.
Yeah, because of course when we get to Saru's speech on the Discovery about him sort of talking about the crew as a family and all that sort of stuff, and kind of being anti-Lorca at that moment, that was a very powerful moment. And of course, if that's the case, I don't know if this novel is going to find its way to that moment. And I think as a moment, his speech was a defining time in his character's arc. So again, yeah, I wonder what all they're going to do, if they're going to set up his fear or if they're going to set up his heroics. That should be an interesting take on things.
It's interesting to think about what it would be like to get inside the head of a character whose entire motivation is about about being afraid all the time and how to be less afraid or how to manage their fear. It's actually, I think, one of the things that science fiction is really good at, broadly speaking, is that it helps us analyze ourselves by putting it into this alternate construct where we can separate out humanity and analyze these things without our own biases getting in the way. I'm actually reminded of another science fiction show I was watching where it took place in the future, and there's these comedians that were actually played by the real life Penn and Teller, and they were saying, "Yeah, we've studied all kinds of alien humor." And they were getting a little philosophical about it, and they said, "Of course, human humor is based upon fear of embarrassment in some way, and this other species." Their humor is all about the failure to achieve complete spiritual enlightenment. And I was thinking, what would that even be like? Like, wow, could that even work?
didn't actualize into the transcendent one, and that they could do a whole sitcom on that.
Exactly. So that's why I think it's great that they're analyzing these kinds of things, and I'm happy to see him dig deep into Saru, and I'm looking forward to it. So I got it, like I said, at the top of the stack.
Absolutely. And yeah, this doesn't mean I'm not going to read the books for sure, but that is a take that I will definitely take into consideration. And you do bring up a good point, John. Finally, in news, we've got maybe a bit more clarification on what's going on with After Trek. There was some initial sort of Twitter noise that After Trek was getting canceled, and Matt Mira was kind of maintaining more or less silence, but he has said now that think of it more as it being put into dry dock, and it's going to be reimagined, or in this case maybe refitted. So that's good to hear. I like the idea of there being sort of an after show where we can hear and talk about the things that have just happened, maybe get some insights from the actors themselves and whatnot. So I didn't really listen too much to the initial noise that was being made about it, because of course, until we hear something official, really, there's nothing to report. So, John, were you on the ground floor of this one?
I was, in that, if by on the ground floor, had I been watching After Trek? And the answer is yes. I watched every single one of them, either immediately after the episode, the Discovery episode, or shortly thereafter. And I gotta say, I'm glad they're reconsidering what they're doing. And I say this from a place of love and optimism. They didn't start out on the best of footing on After Trek, and I saw some improvement, which was a good thing, as the show continued over the course of Discovery's run. And I hope that they take the lessons learned and they make it an even better experience and an even more engaging experience and an even more positive experience. And I hope, I don't know if Matt is going to be running the show or not in season 2. I hope that whatever decision they decide to do makes the show better, or whether it's they give Matt some additional help, or whether they choose to do something else. I just hope the show comes out and it goes over like gangbusters, and it's a great thing that we feel should be an essential part of our Star Trek experience. But I'm just optimistic about what they're doing, and I hope it works out for everybody.
Yeah, me too. And I think that's kind of where I'm gonna let it lie. Is I hope there is something, and I hope that their reimagining of it puts on an improvement. And if there has been any criticisms or comments or concerns or constructive criticisms, more than that, from fans or folks who are involved in the production process, that they take those into consideration and keep moving forward. So that's really all I'll say on the matter. So we have some incoming transmissions. Let's take a look at what's happening and upcoming in the Tricorder Transmissions Podcast Network, starting with the old PoliTreks. Shashank and I have some interesting things coming down the pipe. We have a supplemental coming where we're going to be talking about some of the toxic effects of fandom that exist both in Star Trek, but also in Star Wars and in others. There has been a few revelations that have come out recently, and of course, there has been a lot of hoopla over Discovery as well, in terms of some people not liking it as much as others, and there being quite a few larger flame wars coming off of that in social media. Trek Ranks, of course, we've got the hottest characters, parts 1 and 2, which I'm very upset with, because John, I feel like you and I would be the authorities on the hot versus not factor of every character in Star Trek, wouldn't you?
I have no idea what you're talking about, my man. I am like the least qualified person in the world to talk about this. But I will say this for the hottest ladies, I did tweet my selections to Trek Ranks. So if you want to know what I thought, you can dig through my personal Twitter and you can find it there. So I gave my list. And as always, my suggestions were at most unconventional and probably unlike what anybody else would have picked. So that's all I'll say.
Well, that's fair enough. I would, I don't know if I could make a list like that. I would actually probably say the Enterprise. That is the hottest male or female character of Star Trek. So, yeah, the Enterprise
that is
itself.
A very unconventional pick, and I think Jim would love it.
Yeah. What's happening over on Trek Profiles?
Oh, it's been a big week. We just released episode 5 for Patreon supporters last Saturday as we record this, and the regular episode will be hitting the feed so you can satisfy your longing for some fan analysis on Wednesday with the amazing and wonderful, with my amazing and wonderful guest, Crystal Pisano, who's going to be talking about her fandom and why Star Trek means a lot to her. And we took her fandom, laid it out on the table, and dissected it like one of those Cardassian voles in Lorca's Chamber of Horrors on the Discovery. And it was a really great episode, so I can't wait for y'all to hear it.
I can't wait to hear it myself, especially with a high school science reference like that. That's pretty cool. So speaking also of earlier mention of Saru, Disco Trek has their Saru deep dive. It's just been released, and it is a doozy. I would highly recommend us all to go over there and have a listen to that. It's worth it. It's worth a second listen. Very interesting. I'm not going to release any other information on that, although it would probably be a good supplemental if you are about to read the book as well. So that's what's coming down the pipe for us. And if you are enjoying our shows, you should consider becoming a patron on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. We've got lots of exclusive donor content, and upcoming we've got some entertaining little tidbits showing up for our patrons as well. Some hangouts are going to be happening pretty soon, and it's always nice because you make it a lot easier for us to get all of this exciting and wonderful Trek content out to you. So that is all the Trek news we have to share with you this week. But if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can visit us on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and online at thetricordertransmissions.com. Where can we find you on the interwebs, Mr. John Krikorian?
Well, probably the best place is on Twitter. If you want to follow my podcast Twitter account, that's at TrekProfiles, and that I keep very much Star Trek focused and very much focused on podcasting and on my show and stuff like that, and interacting with other fans about stuff. But if you want to follow my personal Twitter, which is probably half Star Trek and half random other things that interest me, and I let that one go pretty far afield, that's at JKinLV. So you can find both of those on the Twitter. And if you want to follow my show, you can also follow that on Trek Profiles pretty much everywhere, on Facebook and on the web as well.
Yes, and you can find me on Twitter through PoliTreks, just at PoliTreks. And then, of course, the same thing on the Facebook. But if you do want to follow me, yes, there are some Star Trek things that show up. And then otherwise, it's heavily political because, of course, I do co-host a political podcast. So if you want to engage in that direction, you can find me at Bjorn DeFjord, BJORNDEFJORD. And feel free to engage as you see fit. We'll be back next week with more news from around the Trek universe, but until then, live long and prosper.